is Dr. Timothy Huerta, and I am the Chief Research Information Officer and Associate Dean for Research and Information Technology for the Wexner Medical Center and the College of Medicine at Ohio State University, and the Director of Biomedical Informatics for the Clinical and Translational Sciences Institute. I also serve as a faculty member in the Departments of Family and Community Medicine and the Department of Biomedical Informatics at Ohio State. And I'm here to talk to you in my role as providing infrastructure for our enterprise to make data research ready for researchers under HIPAA authorized components and requirements, and to bring you through our journey into how we have transformed clinical notes into research ready data. I have a partner in this process, Dr. Christopher Bartlett. He is at Nationwide Children's, and we have worked on this pipeline together because the data set that we are building is one in which we have not only the data from our institution, but the data from Ohio State, but the data from other institutions as well. And Nationwide Children's, who is a member of our CTSI, is the first institution and first partner that we have in this process. That process exists within the context of a larger environment where we perform data science studies, which is if we build the data commons, the logic of which is if we build the data commons and we make that data commons available to a multidisciplinary team and provide the requisite analytic tools necessary for them to instantiate discovery out of that data, and then link that with the mechanism for testing out how those models work in practice, we can make translational science discoveries happen. And this is a virtuous cycle. So if you think about that very first component, which is the data commons, in order to enable individuals to function within this framework, they really do have to have access to data in order to do the kind of AI, clinical decision support, et cetera, work. And so one of the fundamental innovations at Ohio State was the creation of a data-oriented protocol that was a modification of our prior honest broker process that sought to really create data transparency across our organization. Our view on data is that there are a series of data sources that our information technology department manages that is clinically generated data. As an ethics shop, we adhere to the Chronicles Clarity Caboodle framework for our data. And we can use that to generate an instantiation of our data that adheres to the OMOP format. But within the context of that data, things like images and clinical notes don't currently have a home. They exist in OMOP as clinical notes, but I, generally speaking, can't convey those to researchers. So we're going to get to how that happens. The first step that we do is we effectively move all of that data in some form to Azure. And so we daily upload Caboodle. We will have data in the specific data that we need from Clarity. We don't move all of Clarity in, just like we don't move all of our images, or just like we don't move all of our images in. But the challenge around clinical notes is particular. And that is because clinical notes could contain integrated PHI data. And so the ability to deliver clinical notes in the context of a coded limited set through honest brokerage requires that we have the requisite tools in order to deliver that data to researchers. And that is what we have done in partnership with John Snow Labs, which is a process I'm going to identify in this presentation. That allows us to move clinical notes as a component of coded limited sets into space that is available to researchers under our unified life scale IRB. And so that coded limited set version of our operational data sits under the governance and guidance of our IRB under a shared PI model with myself and Chris representing OSU and NCH respectively. And then we generate, subsequent to that, a structurally equivalent synthetic data source that is not human subjects data that we make available to research teams. So I want to talk about how OSU used tools provided by John Snow Labs to get us to the point where we could provide clinical notes at scale to the organization. And what is important about this isn't that we provide clinical notes to a study. This is an enterprise level system, meaning we became an Epic shop in 2012. And as a result, our honest brokers have effectively brokered the data structures required for all of Caboodle, some of Clarity, all of OMOP, and now all of our clinical notes. And as a result, we have made that available in an open platform for researchers to leverage for their research. If you look at the data that we are presenting, we have what we call core and non-core data. So as part of our core data, we have a two-phase strategy to deliver clinical notes. One, which is catch-up ingestion, which is effectively the de-identification of all of our clinical notes through December 2024, and also subsequent enrichment. And we are at the end of, we've completed those two steps for the OSU data and are currently loading them into our Databricks cluster on Microsoft Azure. And what we make available to researchers is a lot broader than just the clinical notes. So we make Caboodle available, we make OMOP available, we make telemetry data available, we have integrated social determinants of health, we have our cancer registry data. All of that is available on our platform, and our protocol does not require that we second that data into subclusters or subsets to answer specific questions. The data lake is what is covered by the IRB, and as a result, we make the entire content of the data lake available to researchers once they have been approved for access, leveraging both technical controls and professional controls around requirements of access and control. So let's talk about how we've created a system to help us with clinical notes. So what we have identified is a 4-step process to facilitate researchers engaging in data science using our data. One component is the need to identify cohorts, because when you create a data lake that functions at the level of the enterprise, you have a lot of noise in that process. And I may only be interested in 2,000 patients with a certain condition. And as a result, I will want to identify that cohort so that I can use that cohort across all of my studies. And so we have a cohort process that we've developed in Databricks that helps us identify a cohort by MRNs, by encounter numbers, by study IDs. In other words, they were enrolled in a study, and that is represented in Epic. We can also do it by the physician seen, by the clinic visited, etc. So a good example would be, I want everybody who's been seen in primary care. We identify all the primary care clinics, and then that becomes the definition of the cohort. And that helps the researchers focus on the data that they're interested in and reduces computational complexity. They are taking advantage of our de-identification and enrichment pipeline. For de-identification, we have created a pipeline notebook that accepts a set of identified notes and processes it through a de-identification process using the de-identification pipeline based on our HIPAA-approved John Snow Lab software. It includes a masking process that creates 4 versions of obfuscated data that replaces sensitive information with other information. Subsequently, we run that data through an NLP enrichment pipeline on the notes so that in the end, researchers not only get access to a de-identified note, they actually get pre-processed NLP-based entity definitions within the context of each clinical note. And then we can push small sets of that data based on the cohort to the AI lab software provided by John Snow Labs so that they can engage in subsequent model building. So let's break this process down. And I'm going to put the cohort component to the side. Our de-identification process includes a masking process that creates 4 versions of obfuscated data. That is, we might replace a word with an entity name. We might replace a word with asterisks of the same length. In this case, David is 5 characters, so it's 5 asterisks. We might define a fixed length asterisks version of the note. And so here you might, if we had set that for the entire data set to be 8, it would replace David's name with 8 asterisks. And then we have a replacement random in-kind data at replacement length, which is effectively replacing David. I identify that's a first name. I go to a second list that is a list of male first names. I replace David's name with Mikey because Mikey is a 5-letter name on that list. What is that? Why do we do this? Why do we de-identify? Well, we do this because we are trying to ensure patient privacy by removing the sensitive components within the clinical note. And we have written this tool across both Databricks and our supercomputing center. So we have a compute cluster that is composed of 25,000 cores across 800 nodes. And we have done this process in both platforms. And the advantage for this is it allows us to take advantage of on-prem compute for catching us up to where we are in terms of historic data. But then we insert these same tools into Databricks, and now we can actually process data in real time as data is written into our data pipelines in our data commons. Generally speaking, the advantages from a value proposition is it sets up the right tools for researchers who may not have the expertise necessary to detect PHI, to understand what PHI is. By creating an enterprise copy of those notes, what we're basically doing is saying, here is a safe copy of those notes that meet these criteria. Second is it allows us to process notes efficiently. So we spent a lot of time thinking about how do we move this process efficiently and effectively through our pipelines. And if we have to rebuild those pipelines for every single study, we're wasting a lot of effort. And then we can guarantee from the medical center that we have achieved subsequent redaction at the level of expert determination and safe harbor because we use both approaches in the context of our data model to deliver notes that are connected to our original data so that we have one platform where you have a true view of all of the components of the patient in terms of their data. So I talked about 4 de-identification types, and I have a prototypical note. Mateo Gomez, a 28-year-old man, suffered a car accident driving near his home, yada, yada, yada. And what you see here are 3 of the 4 ways that we de-identify that data. Entity name replacement, I know that Mateo Gomez is a name, and so I'm replacing that with the entity tag name age, location. I know in the context of the note what is missing. I've got my variable length asterisk replacement. You'll see some of those variable lengths are longer. For example, the address is longer, the names are longer, but you'll notice the passport number is shorter because the passport number is only 6 digits. And in fixed length asterisk replacement, we've replaced each entity with only 5 asterisks for the purposes of this example. And you'll see that the same information is being taken out of each of these notes according to the rules specified in our Python notebook. But the one that we have been most commonly using is the constant length entity replacement model, which effectively replaces information with data from external, we generate data externally, and then we ensure that that data is added back in a consistent manner so that it's not randomized at the level of the note. It is a random name constructed at the level of the MRN, the patient identifier, so that whenever I have a note from this MRN, ABC123, Jacob Smith will be the name replacing that name in that note. And so the consistency of that process is important. Additionally, because we are adhering to a coded limited standard, we've removed some of the requirements here. For example, you will notice that the 28-year-old man is present in this slide and was not present in the prior slide, because while the prior slide showed the entities we were replacing and de-identified them, the constant length entity replacement model adheres to the HIPAA requirements for a coded limited set and not a de-identified set. So you'll notice that we replace names even if that name isn't just the patient's name. So for example, down here, there was the name of his caretaker, Nicholas Schultz, and the system that we created identifies names and replaces names. And as a result, because we know that is a name, we've replaced it with an alternative name to ensure that we don't have accidental leakage, because we've instituted a patient-only name process. Additionally, we created a JSON file that allows us to understand where we have made replacements. So the JSON comes from the software provided by John Snow Labs, and we use that within the context of delivering our OMOP NLP information. So you'll see here, we replaced something, you don't know what it was, with the word Jacob Smith. That category, the entity that we replaced was the person, meaning a person's name. It started at the very first character, which is the 0th character in JSON. And it is 11 characters long. And I get a confidence score in terms of how likely is that category associated with that text. We do not adjust by confidence score. If any entity is identified, currently we are delivering the replacement text irrespective of the confidence, so that the system identified any risk. We have done that replacement in the data we've delivered to researchers. So that is the model that we use for de-identification. I want to add, not only do we use the NLP model to identify those components, but we augment that prior to processing by creating a table of PII elements from HIPAA, and we also, using finds and searches through regular expressions, ensure that all of the potential names are actually scrubbed up front through a safe harbor process, i.e. I have a table that has all the things I should scrub. I look at the text and do a find and replace on any of those. And then I subsequently run it through the AI process. And the AI process in and of itself has been deemed by our university and medical center to be sufficient for de-identification. And as a result, what I've done is effectively amp up the quality of our de-identification that I'm delivering in the context of the note itself. We also are running 7 NER models, and we provide that as a second set of data to researchers, in part because we wanted to pre-seed and pre-process data before we presented it to individuals who could then look at the data and say, okay, in the context of this, I'm really not interested in gender. I'm not interested in duration. I'm not interested in employment. I'm absolutely interested in dosage form, drug ingredient. And by doing this, I can then have a conversation with subject matter experts about what entities they want pre-processed by showing them everything that's there across, let's say, 100 notes. And then we preload that into the AI lab, and effectively that serves as a starting point. And our goal in doing this is to reduce the associated technical load for teams engaging in this, because we're effectively leveraging NLP to identify named entities. And they don't actually have to go write any code to make that happen. And they get to see what the 7 models that we've had, which are effectively the clinical model created by John Snow Labs, a broader model of that. It's called Greedy because it picks up larger sections of text. We have drugs, we have social determinants of health, and then we have 2 cancer models that we've integrated. We make that data available in its raw form to some researchers, but we also make that data available using John Snow's AI lab, so that subsequently, if they wanted to begin to train their own models to look for dynamics that may not have been caught by the AI model, they can do so leveraging the generative AI lab for that purpose. And that AI lab allows for large-scale text annotation along the same lines of annotation that one might find in a program like In Vivo. One of the things that Ohio State was doing was starting to write this software ourselves. We had a version of this called Parable, and we abandoned that effort in favor of using the John Snow Labs tool because it was very quick to deploy on the data that we had, and we could create pipelines and focus not on the software development, but focus on the data engineering aspects, and then leaving the use of the tools to the research teams. They're also able to execute on additional NLP models if they'd like. And one of the advantages that we see in the AI lab is the ability to include LLM tools like other tools that are out there, and to effectively experiment with prompts and tasks in a live playground inside of our Azure tenant that has been built for research exploration. And what it gives us on the back end is the required compliance and version tracking and audit ready processes that we need to ensure that we are maintaining the level of data necessary to demonstrate to the institution that we are meeting privacy requirements and HIPAA requirements. One of the other advantages of the AI lab was that it allowed for collaboration at scale. And what I mean by that is that we could explore things like inter-rater reliability. It allowed us to do things like allow multiple coders on a single data set at the same time. And as a result, we thought the tool that was being provided would have taken a lot of effort to build from scratch. And we've begun just leveraging these tools and then partnering with John Snow Labs when we envision the need for a particular technology to be deployed within the context of any part within this pipeline. We're starting off at OSU in specific cohorts. We're doing work in breast cancer, ophthalmology, technology, traumatic brain injury, radiation oncology, head and neck surgery. And we have been providing this data to research teams who have begun the process of using these pipelines to better understand how they can engage in data science and potentially building large language models that are custom constructed for the purposes of pulling things like trauma data out of clinical notes. And as a result, because we processed all of this locally, there's a lot less conversation about what it costs to get this done more globally, which is a very big issue with regards to the cost sensitivity of research. We bore this cost once at an efficient price point, and then we provided that data within our system, and the onus and agency then sits at the project level to engage in the informatics work and subject matter expertise that needed to be deployed in order to get the data into the form that they needed to answer their question. And so we think of this as a more cost-efficient structure to facilitate research, but we also have all these pipelines constructed so that if they wanted a custom pipeline created, we could leverage our existing pipeline plan and make modifications to meet their needs. In terms of where we're going, we've been building on our foundation to deploy new tools created internally and also in partnership. And we've been doing things like taking our data lake and expanding on those tool sets with tools like Brim Analytics at Vanderbilt and Apropos with Stanford and Search at Montefiore. And these systems digest the information that we've generated using this process. So Brim Analytics, for example, uses natural language to identify cohorts. And I can actually do that in a HIPAA compliant way by doing an IRB request, but I could do exploratory work in Brim Analytics to understand whether I might have people who are appropriate for my study through a large language model assessment of the de-identified data inside of LifeScale, so that I have a better understanding more foundationally about whether we're an appropriate site. That's an example of how we're using these de-identified clinical notes to help answer questions that are more self-service oriented, as opposed to going to an informatician and having them pull that data. We're integrating this data with things like the de-identification of imaging studies through a partner, Medicom, and currently are in the process of transforming not just clinical notes, but digital pathology and radiology reports, so that I'll have de-identified radiology reports, imaging studies, and within the context of a coded limited set of text that allows people to begin to understand how the image associates with the text, which then associates with the broader context of our data lake. And so our longer term vision is effectively to improve our capabilities to deliver on this institutional data vision of driving integration, accessibility, and innovation across our enterprise, and making that available to researchers in ways that reduce transaction costs, so that when you come to OSU as a faculty member in the College of Medicine, getting access to data is a 7-day process. And when you get access to everything. You don't get access to some data, and all of that is within the context of a large, all of that is in the context of ensuring that the data that we are giving them maintains the privacy, security, and appropriate controls for a coded limited set built institutionally and delivered at the level of project teams.